Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We have a great guest with us today for this Spirit of Aviation Week segment. I'm Kyle Ludwig, coming to you from EAA headquarters in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Today, we have an ultimate EAAer on the show, someone who has designed, built, and flown his own airplane even. Elliot, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me, Kyle.
No problem at all. Elliot, we've seen a lot of your programs and your airplanes on YouTube and through your social media channels, but how did you get in aviation?
I grew up in a flying family. My dad had a Cessna 172 for most of my childhood, and then I guess when I was pretty young, before I can remember, he bought a Swift, and we had a Swift growing up. And then that time frame when you start getting into you get into cars because you want to get into girls. He hot rodded out his Swift. He put a big motor in it and set some world records with it. And anyway, it was the perfect send off to not playing with cars, playing with airplanes instead.
That is awesome. And you've had a great career after growing up in aviation as an engineer and being a part of a lot of special programs in aviation. How did you progress into a professional aviation career?
So the big thing with my old man, he was a pilot, but just for fun. So it was a big thing in the family that for me to even think about making money with aviation, I didn't really have a good model for that. So establishing that model really came down to two guys. One was my Uncle Burl, who was an A&P mechanic, and the other was a guy named Dave Groh, who restored Stearmans and T6s just down the road from the airport where I learned to ride my bicycle at. So between those two guys, they sort of established that model for how you could, use airplanes to make your money rather than just spend it. And that set the trajectory that led to the rest of it.
That is awesome. So Elliot, you have a really cool company name, Wasabi Flight Test or Wasabi Air Racing. How did that name come about?
So weirdly enough, we were eating sushi, right? So we did come up with the name Eating Sushi. We were looking for a name for the race plane. We had bought a cassette project that happened to be green, and I was looking for a name that would tie the color of the airplane to the branding and would also fit well on the side of the airplane, right? There's like that aspect ratio between the, pilot's seat back bulkhead and the front of the horizontal stab, and you want to kind of occupy that space as efficiently as possible. So between that and having a lot of vowels meant that it was going to be fun to say. This is a really engineering response. Sorry about that. But that was where we came up with Wasabi, and unfortunately now we're stuck with it.
So tell us a little bit about that company.
I think you got to kind of I talked about my Uncle Burl and Dave, right, back in Michigan, right? And so you sort of like, I'm going to make money with aviation. Like, what does that even look like? And you're trying to figure out like how to set those sites, right? Started doing bookwork. I get an engineering degree. Like, how does that all add up to? Well, end up in Mojave at Scaled, right? And so quickly that idea of becoming an engineer on aviation, an engineer on airplanes to like, can you fly them? Like, what does flight test look like? That's like a really like exponential curve, right? We go from like, whoa, can I make money with an airplane to like, oh, wow, like Mike Melville is like a high school trained like A&P/astronaut. Like that is the coolest thing ever. And how do you like do that, right? Well, it turns out like other people were coming up with that same thing at the same time. So there was like a handful of us at Scaled and really at the Mojave Airport that were all sort of competing for like, who was going to, the visualization was that somebody was going to have to sit in the right seat of those spaceship flights, somewhere between like, Melville was going to get the first flight or Pete or whatever, but there was going to be some flights before customers were in the right seat or in the back seat. And that seat was going to, somebody was going to get bored and they were going to put someone there and you would have a chance to be an astronaut, supersonic, all reversible flight controls, rocket engine, like everything, flying the world's greatest home built. So creating a path to make yourself competitive for that, right? In this environment like Mojave, where, for Spaceship One, before Spaceship One, there had been Voyager. Mojave was desolate. There was nobody really there. After Spaceship One, the place got like flooded with talent, right? So there's all these guys that are vying for my spot. I want that spot, right? So, I go to work. I work as hard as I can all day. But at the end of the day, there's time left at the end of the day. What am I going to do with it? And that's where Wasabi came down to, right? So whether it was with air racing or helping a friend develop a platform or whatever, it's like I can subsidize my flight test activities with a full-time job. And then ideally, I don't have to, like with Wasabi, with the Siren, I had to like design the airplane, build the airplane, me and my wife working, basically 2 full-time jobs to get that thing done. As you move to where you're doing that more and more professionally, like just not having to build the airplane is such a huge benefit, right? independent of like whether or not I get paid or not, right? So if you can use that full-time job to subsidize the back end, that's where Wasabi allows me to, build that resume that hopefully makes me competitive. Remember, the sort of the end of the civilian test pilot dream at Scaled was when they started bringing in more and more military trained test pilots, right? Military trained test pilot, right? It's $2 million to make him a fighter pilot. Then you drop another $1 million to $2 million on it to make him a test pilot. That's what you're competing with as a civilian, right? So how do you get that experience, right? So if I have to like give away my time, at least I didn't have to build all those airplanes to get the experience. And that's what the basis of Wasabi is, right? If I have to, make a silly YouTube video or do some engineering or build an airplane, whatever it is to get the flight test experience, to build that resume, because that's first of all sort of ungettable experience, and second of all, it's what we're passionate about. So that's the Wasabi thing.
You're definitely a super passionate guy, right? We've already seen it today in this interview. But let's go back to chatting about, an EAA hero of ours, Bert Rutan and Scaled Composites, and what he really built out there in Mojave, right? Because as you said, there was nothing out in Mojave until Bert came about in the big Scaled rush in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. What was it like working for Bert and working at Scaled Composites during this wild time of innovation?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest things about working for Scaled is, number one, like getting used to being around so much talent, right? And having like, when a hard problem pops up, like having to kind of like fight off the other engineers so that you can do it, to kind of, like we're talking about, like build a motor on yourself, establish yourself in the community, move yourself forward. The other side is that there's like this, just like we were talking about, like you're going to be a commercial astronaut in a home-built rocket, like that is such like exponential thinking, right? And like it's a kid coming from Michigan, right? Like in Michigan, like, yeah, EAAers like were home builders, but most of them were flying certified stuff, right? And like, yeah, we would fly to Oshkosh every year, but we camp under the wing of a 172, and yeah, we would look at long easies, but you had to walk through fields of Cessnas to get there, right? Like, to go from that to the king, the master, right? Like Bert is the EAA thing, right? To work for him and try to get used to that mindset, right? One of the big things that jumped out at me early on was like, obviously he, terribly talented engineer, and yeah, he could lead people, but there was this thing like leading people. When I think of leading people, it's like, the guy in the front with a podium, and he's like walking through our goals for the day or whatever, like that sort of micro level. The thing with Bert was that, with the hair and then those big blue eyes, right? And like, he didn't have to say 3 sentences in the whole room, like, we're going, like, I don't know where we're going, but those eyes are taking me, we're going there, right? And to try to like temper that as an engineer with like, well, yeah, but like there's going to be like nuts and bolts, and like a thing needs to be built, and it needs to like be strong, like all those like real hard practical problems that fall behind the dream that got us here, that moved me from Michigan all the way to California. And I'm living in a hut next to the airport, and I'm dedicating every dollar I have to building silly little airplanes, right? Like, so trying to get like something that seems like practicality out of that was a lot of the struggle with figuring out how to work at scale, but absolutely some of the most rewarding time in my professional career.
So Bert, you've done a lot of what Bert's done, actually, which is design, build, and fly your own airplanes. Let's talk about the Siren for a second. How did the idea come about? How did you move from the casket you talked about earlier, and why Wasabi's named what it is, to the Siren and racing it at Reno, and then eventually flying it nonstop from Mojave to Oshkosh? I mean, how does all that progress for you?
I'm flattered you know about all that stuff. Yeah, so basically, you look at the formula class, right? Reno is its own thing, but it's really dominated by sort of a pilot personality, like wanting to prove oneself as a stick and rudder guy. Of all the stuff that happens there, the most of the engineering mindset would be in the formula class, especially the sort of prototyper mindset that we're talking about with Bert. So if you're looking for a way to kind of grow that skill set, that Formula One rule book almost ends up being like a specification diagram, right? Or, like, what do we need in the world's next F-22 or F-15? Like, it's the same thing, but it's even sort of a level deeper, where it goes beyond rules and into like how you would want to do your welds, and like the first pass on how you would do engineering. So, again, 10,000 foot view, I'm in Mojave. I see myself as the next, commercial astronaut riding a rocket. I need to figure out a way to put myself ahead of, my peers. I'm like, well, I can take this cassette, right? And I can rebuild every single part of it, which is what most of the formula guys do. They tend to be pilots. They're sort of swapping wings and cowlings and engines and yada, yada. And by the time you're done, fast forward 4 years, 5 years, you will have built every part of that airplane, right? Or we can just push the cast into the other corner of the hangar and start from scratch and do it all at once. And now we can check off all these professional goals that I'm trying to click through in order to do the rest of the things I want to do with my life, assuming that it wasn't going to be air racing was where I was going to make my career. So Wasabi started as a direct path to Elliot in the seat for the first flight. Fundamentally, if I own the airplane, design the airplane, etc., I get to decide who sits in that seat, and it's going to be me, right? So I'm trading 2,000 hours or whatever it ended up being, 2.5, almost 3 years of Jennifer and I working 40 hours a week for one flight, right? And call it the first 10 hours or whatever it is. That was the trade-off. So the great thing about the Formula class, like I said, is you have sort of a rule book. You have a very well-defined problem. So like Melmoth is a great example, right? It's a, interesting home build, but he spent a whole bunch of time at the beginning deciding, like, I'm going to fly nonstop from, I think it was LA to Tokyo or LA. Like, he has to create a mission, right? How many people are going to sit in it? What stall speed do I care about? All that stuff's off the table with a Formula One design, right? So that gave me a great starting point. The other side was that at the time I was crewing for John Sharp, Team Nemesis, one of the best, whatever, right there with Bert Rutan as far as being established in the industry. So I had a great ear to pull on, right? So between being able to go to work and pull on the ears at work and pull on John's ear about that stuff, I had a lot of resources to play with, and it gave me a really clear path. The last thing is you want to have, not only do you want to have a clear place to start on your project, but you want to have a clear end point, right? There's a lot of projects most projects just end up sitting in the back of a garage for, many years, et cetera. But even when they're done, like, when are they done, right? Is it when I get to put that 500-hour sticker on it at Oshkosh? Is it when I put the 1,000-hour sticker on it? Is it when I just get it to Oshkosh, right? What is the final establishment of I have finished my project? So the fact that I could build a thing and then put it on the race course. Boom, that's a milestone. Done. We could walk away right then, right? Oh, I made it to the top of the silver. Oh, there we go. Milestone. I won a race. Wow, right? Or I made it in the gold, right? You have these clear things that you could mark off, and every one of them is another resume point to build this career, right? So just like you were talking about setting a world record, like setting a world record is a hard thing. Well, not if you set it point to point. Well, point to point records are kind of boring. Well, what if we made it like really weird, where we take an airplane that's designed to fly like, 8 miles at a time, and instead we fly all the way from California to Oshkosh, and we do it as a flight of 8 airplanes, or we take off at 3 o'clock in the morning, land during the air show, like all that cool stuff. Again, it's about creating these moments that allow you to have things to point back to on a resume, to build a career, to try to put something together. Because remember, this is impossible stuff, right? We talked about Bert, we talked about Sharp, right? These are 2 out of how many EAA members are there, right? There are a lot of people trying to do this because it's so cool. It's a hard thing. The more you can plan it out, the more you can think about the problem ahead of time, being a dorky engineer, maybe the better chance you have of being productive with the whole thing. Am I rambling yet?
No, this is awesome. Absolutely awesome stuff. And we love the enthusiasm. And I think that's what separates, as you said, the 240,000 EAA members, right? And their passion, their enthusiasm. Let's talk for a second about an airplane that's been a big deal the past couple of years. So a twin-engine Quickie in itself would be an amazing machine, right? I mean, the Quickie itself is a cool airplane, and it personifies a lot about what EAA is and what Bert is and what, composite airplanes have been over the decades. But then you guys decided – thank you. You guys have decided to bolt on a couple turbine engines. And being a big modeler, it's awesome to see them being about that size, right? Tell us about how that idea even came about, and why did you decide to do it, and kind of about being with that program? Because we all know what happened, of course, but what happened with that program?
Well, yeah. So we all know what happened. If you've seen the video, I assume that did pretty well on YouTube. We didn't have any control of it. It went whatever. People did stuff with it. There's a report. If you haven't read the report, our internal report as well as the NTSB report, look into it. I think there's a lot of good technical detail in there, but sort of across the top view of what happened there. Again, we're in Mojave, right? At this time in Mojave, there was a lot of people getting pulled out of hangars and stuff. There's a lot of turnover. Some of the old sort of hangar rats, desert rats guys were kind of getting turned around. And I made it a point to keep track of what was in each hangar. I want to know what was going on at the airport. It was very valuable to me. Again, we make the effort to come all the way out to Mojave. I want to know what's going on, right? Well, I found a Quickie in one of the hangars, right? And so I kind of knew it was there. It was hanging up in the top of the hangar. It wasn't on the ground. And so I kind of kept an eye on it. Well, it turned out the owner was maybe ready to part with it. He'd done most of what he wanted to do with it. The joke has always been that I found it in the dumpster. Well, it wasn't in the dumpster. It may have been on its way to the dumpster. It certainly wasn't going to fly anytime soon. So at the time, I had a horde of hangars, and I purposely kept those hangars stocked with projects that I was kind of trying to find a buyer for, a motor for, whatever, money, whatever we were trying to do. So I grabbed the Quickie off the roof, wheeled it over and stuck it in a hangar. And it sat there for, a year or something like that. My plan had been to make it electric. I was really passionate about the Quickie as a really clean airframe, right? I don't need to tell you this. You sort of said it yourself. It's a super efficient airframe. It's a super small airframe. It's interesting as an EAA-er, as a Rutan guy, right? But also as if you're going to put a new platform, a new engine on, a new power plant, because it's so small, because it's so low drag, right? It maybe opens up some other opportunities. In the case of electric, I thought it was exciting. We were pitching it to electric customers and not getting anywhere. Fundamentally, what it comes down to is you're going to wear the batteries out in the program, and the batteries are the most expensive part of the program. So you can't really convince an investor they're going to be able to take their parts back and run after the whole thing's over when you're dealing with electric, because you're going to damage the batteries. Anyway, so it just was sitting there. We were approached by a turbine engine company that wanted to put a turboprop on the Siren. They wanted to put big power on the Siren, or they wanted to build another Siren or whatever. I was very busy at the time with just campaigning the Siren, and then we were trying to do some stuff with the Lancers. So it was a lot to take on, building a whole nother airplane, yada yada yada. Anyway, so I just did what I always do, which I just take everybody through all the hangars and say, okay, here's kind of what I'm thinking here. We have this platform, and we walked into the hangar, and the guy was like, "What is this?" He'd never seen the Quickie before. Fine. Well, I got back in his truck, and sitting in between the two seats was a model airplane turbine from the same company, right? Same form function of what ended up going on the airplane. And I was like, can you get these? Anyway, so what it ended up was he wanted a platform to demonstrate this new turbine motor. Wow, okay. This is the whole thing with EAAers, right? You have the airframe, but you don't have the motor, or you have the motor, but you don't have the avionics, right? Getting all those pieces together. We just, like, right there in that moment, we suddenly had all these pieces. The idea was to get the airplane flying just barely, like a flight or two, and then we would take it to Oshkosh. So we would time everything to just get it done, get a little media spike, and then take it to Oshkosh. We were right about a month later, 2 months later, just as the motors were showing up, we were approached by Red Bull. Red Bull wanted to do a documentary about something that was going on at Mojave. But unfortunately, they wanted to run in like the March, April timeframe, so a few months early of what we were planning to do at Oshkosh. So I showed them a bunch of stuff, and I said, here's the Quickie thing. It's coming, but you can't have it. It's not up for grabs. Anyway, so they got super excited. The turbine company, we all started talking. We said, maybe we can do this where we'll do like a double spike, where we'll do a push to fly. They can document it for the reality show thing they want to do, and then we can take the same platform to Oshkosh. The nice thing for me was you would end up at Oshkosh with a more mature platform, right? Rather than showing up with what basically would be a model that had flown, right? Maybe we could put enough time on the airplane between those two dates, and we could actually show up, and maybe we could put on a demonstration, right? At that time, Paul Dye was flying a BD-5. Obviously, there's the Subsonics was out there flying. I was like, man, what if we put 3 micro turbines up? Like, wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't that be, because it's such an easy thing to get passionate about, right? The mini turbine thing, right? It's just like it clicks all the EAA buttons. It fits in so well, the EAA thing. Anyway, so that was the basic setup that led to not only us putting the jet motors on the Quickie, but also the accelerated timeline that sort of moved everything left, which led to how everything played out. But yeah, did that answer the question?
That absolutely answered the question. And that airplane is still one of the coolest things we've seen in the past couple of years, right? Because as you said, it's like pure EAA, small jets, composite, totally out of the box, awesome stuff, right?
Right. And I still, when I look back on the stuff that we did and how quickly we did it, it encapsulates the EAA thing and the Mojave thing and the scaled thing. It was just such a great moment to have enough smart people around and the pieces to come together to get to do something like that. And how fortunate we are that it got documented, because the end result could have been better, but I think a lot of people saw it. And I think certainly in the context of EAA and showing people that you could do cool stuff with airplanes, I think it still carries a lot of value, and I think we're proud of it for that reason.
That's awesome. And for those of you that turn in late, we are talking with Elliot Seguin, known around the world for what he's done in the experimental world, and especially out in Mojave. Let's go back from experimentals to the certified world really quick. You talked about all the folks in Michigan when you were growing up owning, certified spam can Cessnas, things of that nature. And now we just talked about a twin turbine powered Quickie, which is like one of the coolest things we've seen out there lately. But let's talk about your time with Mooney and what you've done in the experimental flight test world and working for Bert and how wild that was, to going back to a certified type program and trying to, flight test an airplane that was going to be brought to the market. Compare and contrast those two different things, experimental world, the certified world, and a new airplane and a new program. Compare and contrast that for us a bit.
Yeah, I think, and I tried to allude to it before, so thanks for giving me the opportunity to kind of fill in the blanks here. I think there's a thing that happens when you're a young guy, got dragged across the country to this like Mecca, right? And you're around the words, big rocket, first commercial, right? These big things. The trophy is in the lobby as you walk in. There's confidence that comes from that, and the confidence is twofold, right? You have to be confident. This is a very hard thing we're doing. You're not going to get to the other side of it if you're not, believing in yourself and pushing, etc. But the other side is that like there's also just no one else doing this, right? So you don't have like any like it's not like we always say that SR-71 is the world's fastest airplane. Well, show me another airplane that was designed to that spec, right? Show me the other people that are going for the first commercial, all reversible flight controls, hybrid rocket power. Like we're the only players in the game, right? And so the big thing that struck me immediately when I got to Mooney was that Part 23, 2 to 3 seat airplane is a hard problem. It's a hard problem, and there are a lot of smart people that have been there, right? And in some ways that made me appreciate, wow, like the Mooney legacy, right? And what they were, I think it was like 10 a month or something at peak production, like silly how profitable, how productive they were as a company, right? So it's fascinating to see on that end, but on the other end to see how well Bert has been able to isolate himself from any of that kind of competition, right? Give me an example where Bert went head to head with somebody else in the exact same territory. And yeah, you could say, I've heard engineers or other aerospace people say, well, shows that he's weak. I think it shows that he's strong, right? He was able to go out there and find all the things we're talking about, the motor company, the customer, the place to play, the mission, all that stuff, and put together to allow you to have an airplane like Proteus exist, right? Like the fact that exists is phenomenal, right? And all that it takes, all the dominoes that have to get lined up to make that happen, phenomenal. But at the same time, the fact that Mooney was able to build whatever it is, thousands and thousands and thousands of this 4-seat, all retractable, Johnson bar gear thing, that was the solution that the market responded to, equally awesome, right? And so in the case of the R&D program that we were running out of Chino, right, you had a situation where you had an engineering team that hadn't worked together before. You had foreign investment. You had a new facility that hadn't worked together. We were brought in relatively late in the game as a flight test team, and recognizing that these are all the same problems at a scale, right? Getting smart people to talk together is hard, right? Solving hard technical problems, hard, right? And the same thing you see in there at Mooney. So we had sort of both sides of the coin at Mooney, where at Chino we had the new facility, new team, yada, yada. But then you jump on a plane, you go to Kerrville, and we do production tests on the M20s in Kerrville, and you're like, wow, these roots are deep, right? Like there were basically tire marks the width of a standard M20 gear that like went all over that facility because so many had rolled through there, right? So yeah, as an experimenter guy, as an EAA guy, it's really easy for us to get wound up in like, a Long Easy is faster than a Cessna 172, and a Glasair is got better cruise performance. Yeah, it was designed to a different spec, and it doesn't mean that the Mooney guys aren't freaking super smart, or the Cessna guys, or the Piper guys. Meanwhile, the Glasair guys are smart too, and Bert's ability to design Long Easy, totally awesome. At the end of the day, we're fortunate that the passion that is experimental aviation, that is EAA, brings out smart people that are willing to dedicate all this time, right, to solving these tough problems. So we end up with these cool machines.
So you're doing something totally different now, and it's not all revolving around the airplane or the platform, right? You're working for a company. Tell us about what you're doing now. Some folks might not know.
Right. So Sanders Aeronautics is I learned about them growing up in Michigan because of Dreadnought. Dreadnought's, the biggest, scariest thing that runs at Reno in the unlimited class. It's a Sea Fury with a 28-cylinder 4360 on the front of it, right? So it's basically running like the book numbers to make 3,500 horsepower or something like that, and win in Reno at those rates. So from that perspective, right, as an EAAer, I'm like, oh, okay, that's the Warburg guys, right? And we go to Oshkosh, we see the Warburg. That's like, they got their own little area, right? And it's different than the home builder guys, right? It's different than the spam can guys. The most fundamental thing that happened when I met Dennis, 15 years ago, was I realized that when Dennis got involved, Dennis Sanders, the founder of the company, or the owner of the company, when Dennis got involved with warbirds, they were like home builds. This was a thing that, yeah, you could get a Mustang for $1,500, but it needed a lot, right? In the case of the Sea Fury, it's got these weird pneumatic brakes with a hand lever on the stick, right? So they were taking F106 wheels and F102 axles and the brake system off of this, put it on there. Well, then you're running this Centaurus motor, which is this British sleeve valve engine. Totally awesome as an engineer. But if you're a home builder type guy down in Chino, California, I'm not going to get those parts. Well, I can get Pratt & Whitney's all day long. So Dennis and his family figured out how to put the American motors on it, the 3350, the 2800, and eventually the 4360, right? So again, that's that home building thing that lines up for me very directly to obviously the Reno side of it, but also just people trying to figure out how to do hard things with machines, in this case flying machines, and very much in the context of EAA. So that's what Sanders is. Sanders is an outfit that does warbird restoration. Historically, they were modified warbirds, mostly for racing, also for sort of taking the strange British engines out, putting the American motors in. But the side of business that I work on is the smoke generator. So going back almost 50 years now, Sanders started making a smoke pod that looks just like a Sidewinder missile, but goes on the tip rails of an F-16. And you can take that to an air show, and you can basically be an air show plane on Sunday, and then you can be a war fighter on Monday. Just take off the smoke winder, put on a Sidewinder, and go shoot the bad guys. They've built almost it's like 800 of these things over the last 50 years. They're all over the world. We don't see them in the U.S. because in the U.S. we can afford to have the Thunderbirds where, they'll argue this, but you basically take an F-16, you take everything that's valuable out of that as a weapon and replace it with smoke oil, right? In this case, if you're a small Air Force, you can't afford to kill an F-16 to have an airshow plane, and that's where the smoke winder comes in. So anyway, so again, we have this weird blend between a home building company, right? Because they're scratch building Sea Furies, right? So they're definitely like prototype mentality, but also they're doing production generators. We're going to build last year we built 30 generators, 30 smoke winders went out of that door, right? You have to have things stabilized. You have to have things documented, quality control. And then lastly, you have to work with the flight test teams overseas, right? So working with a foreign test pilot on a government paycheck who's burning government gas to deal with some problem that we're having with our smoke generators, that absolutely falls back all the way back to what happened at Scaled and what happened at Mooney, et cetera. And then we're also, of course, doing flight tests on the generators there at Sanders. So it's not maybe the most direct move, but it's absolutely direct. And any day you get to play with a Sea Fury is a good day.
But let's hit on that really quick, because I think that's one of the coolest parts. Yeah, we've all seen the Belgian F-16 with the smoke winders on it, and all the other air forces around the world use these things. And it's cool. It's super rad. You can see the vortices and everything. But there's nothing like strapping them on a Sea Fury and seeing the vortices come off a Sea Fury. What's it like to bolt these things up to Dreadnought or the other test Sea Furies and watch it come roaring down the runway at you, blaring smoke and the huge vortices coming? What's that like to experience? It's awesome.
Yeah, no, awesome is just right. And I think it's not until you just like you say, right? You see the Belgian demo, the F-16 looks fantastic, right? 30 degrees alpha and those vapes coming off, like totally awesome. But it's not till you come to Sanders, to Ione. We open up the aerobatic box, right? Dennis gets in 924, his dad's Sea Fury. We put the tip smoke on it, and he does his low altitude routine, which includes 150 knot pass right by the show, 20, 50 feet from you, because the aerobatic box is open. You have a little bit more room to play. That you realize that air show, Frank, Dennis's dad, wanting to do that air show, created the smoke winder, which created the smoke system that we're seeing overseas. This comes from a guy that just finished building a totally cool Sea Fury and wants to show it to his buddies, and that's something I can relate to, right? That's the core thing about the Sanders smoke winder.
So you jump in a lot of different airplanes and fly them. We've seen videos lately. You flying a replica, a smaller Mustang, the Bowers Pony. You've flown the TWERP. You've flown the Siren. What's been the favorite airplane that you've jumped in and flown and actually got behind and flown?
So for me, I try to think about it more as like a mission or a single flight. It turns out if you get too attached to the airplane, it gets too hard to walk away at the end of the program, which when you get into test stuff can actually be dangerous, right? It makes it too hard to say no to a program you don't want to do, or you shouldn't be doing, I should say. Anyway, so as far as like flying experiences, you mentioned probably the top one, right? My wife and I designed and built an airplane, raced it at Reno, and then we flew it nonstop with some of my best buds from California all the way to Oshkosh and got a hero's response when we landed there. That is phenomenal, right? That is the arc of an EAA, right? I mean, you can draw a lot of stuff around that. Absolutely fantastic. Probably next on that list was we did some record setting in Mojave. So we set up a Mojave experimental fly-in, but there was also records. We invite everybody to come out. We could share costs associated with getting the FAA waivers and bringing the NAA out to cordon off the record. As part of that, I had the opportunity to set a 3-kilometer record. So on that day, my wife was flower bombing out of a tri-pacer on a course that we had set up inside the class Delta at Mojave. We had the arrivals going for all the people that were coming for the show the following day. I had set a time to climb record that morning, and then I set a 3-kilometer record that night. I'm diving out of altitude, so you get to dive into your first pass of your 3-kilometer record, right? So for the first pass, I'm diving onto the course because we laid it out in the middle of the desert. It helped with the waivers. We laid out in the middle of the desert. You're screaming in from, like 4,000 feet AGL. It's kind of hard to see the course. So there's cool justification. I said, well, we need to put cars on the course to map it out, so it's for safety, so I can find it. What it meant is we could put news media there, which was the great thing for the experimental flying, but I could also put my buddies down there. So I'm screaming in literally the coolest thing I've ever done, right? I've got stupid kamikaze power on the motor, right? We're screaming through VNE, published VNE. We're going super fast. I have a chance of setting a 3-kilometer record, which is a lifetime goal. Like, little boy listening to Reno on record, right? What Lyle Shelton set a 3-kilometer record. What is a 3-kilometer record, right? Here's that moment. I'm diving into the course and I'm diving. It's a little crazy when you think about it, at my wife. She's marking the course, standing on the hood of her car, right? Freaking so cool, right? And I didn't deserve it. I'd be lucky to have any moment that cool ever again. And it's important to remember how fleeting these things are. But that was totally awesome, right? So you had an airplane. Published VNE was 300 knots indicated. We hit that first trap at just over 400 miles an hour statute. So, because the first pass you can dive into it. Anyway, so faster than I'd ever gone in the airplane before, more power on the airplane than we'd ever run. The engine was unhappy and bucking and barely made it through the record attempt. Totally awesome experience. I was fortunate to have it and some of the best flying I got to do.
And that all happened at Mojave. So a lot of us, were sad that Oshkosh isn't happening this week. A lot of us compare, some of the wonderful things of Oshkosh to the Mojave experimental flying. Talk about that flying a little bit, because a lot of people haven't been, but they should go.
Yeah, so it's I don't know that it's really going on anymore. It was a temporary thing. It started out where Scaled needed to staff up for the Stratolaunch program, right? We're going to build the world's largest airplane. We're going to need the world's biggest engineering staff, right? And since Scaled was famous for having unusual engineers, the thought was you couldn't find engineers the way that you had always found engineers. So we needed a different solution to that problem. The thought was if we had basically a recruiting day, we could attract the talent to come to Mojave, and that might be a little more honest, right? So they kind of know what they're getting into, if that makes any sense. Well, it turns out that that's like really hard, right? If you're going to put a Scaled banner over an event, like how many porta potties you have suddenly becomes really freaking important, right? Because now if there weren't enough porta potties, it's like a national event. Scaled didn't provide enough porta potties is terrifying, right? The amount of time
it's like Oshkosh.
It's like
Oshkosh.
Right, who would want? It's a nightmare. Who wants to deal with that, right? So one of my favorite reviews of the Mojave fly-in was that it looked like it had been set up by engineers. So basically, what we did was we just took Scaled off the letterhead, and a bunch of us were like just calling our friends like, "Hey, you got a cool airplane? You want to like come by?" Like we picked a day, and then like because it was a bunch of engineers, like there wasn't really good like food. There weren't enough porta potties. There weren't enough like water to drink. But the airplanes were phenomenal, right? And the next thing that happened was you got all these like super smart dudes, wicked cool airplanes. But again, like, I don't need to tell you about EAAers, but there's a lot of EAAers that are awesome at what they do because they can go in a basement and be by themselves for free, for 2 weeks or whatever. And that guy, even if he's standing next to that awesome airplane and you're standing right next to him, you may not know that that's the guy. So the next question was, how do we get him talking, right? So the following year, we added this awards thing where we would have a team of judges go around and talk to some of the guys that had brought in some new stuff, get them to talk about it. They would rate it, and then we would give them trophies. Yeah, trophies, whatever trophies. But it got the guys talking, right? And then we started noticing all these people following the guys around right as they're talking about, right? Again, it starts to open the experience up. Again, for us dorky engineer guys, one of the comments had been that, if you want to get recognition at Oshkosh, you need a really cool paint job and great avionics. And the thing about Mojave flying was that wasn't even on the cards. Like, did you make your own supercharger? Then we're going to have something to talk about, right? Did you make your own landing gear? Like, I want to hear that story, right? And so that was where it sort of started with the flying. As it grew, we added we talked about the awards banquet, and then we added the record setting. There was a flower bombing component because there was a lot of guys playing with like light airplanes. They could do that in the morning of like the Friday before. But again, it really was sort of homegrown and allowed Mojave to sort of showcase. One of the interesting things about Mojave is that because of some of the spooky stuff that goes on there, they can't be an open door place, right? You combine that with the fact that it's pretty desolate. Being an open door place, like having someone sit there ready to like take $5 for a ticket and sell you a Mojave t-shirt, that's a bad business idea because not enough people are going to come through, right? So as a result, if you show up, if you as a fanboy show up, and you see this when you're based at the airport, you see the fanboy drive up to the gate and like get out of their car and like walk up to the gate and like look around, like I know this is the cool place where the cool stuff happens, but how do I see it, right? So the idea was that independent of what Scaled's needs were, as a culture, right? As the culture of Mojave, if we could just pick a day where we're all going to be like a little more open, right? And then if you're going to invite someone up, they come up on that day and they're at least it's not a weird, cold, desolate thing, right? There's people around, stuff going on, and, hot dogs or, whatever, that maybe that as a community you could kind of pull together. So that was what we were playing with. And it was amazing, phenomenal experience. I have no interest in, doing events, but there were some things within that about just having a bunch of the right people around, right? Just like Oshkosh, right? Where good stuff happens. And independent, I'm not a porta potty guy or deciding whether we're going to have funnel cakes or corn dogs. I don't want anything to do with any of that stuff, right? But that was pretty awesome. And certainly we talk about things we're going to miss about Oshkosh this year. That's on my list.
Absolutely. There's probably a lot of folks watching today, Elliot, that say, wow, I'm getting ready to flight test my RV, my Sonex, my Long Easy. I mean, whatever the home built airplane is. You've done a lot of flight testing. What advice would you have for them and the seriousness of it and how to really start with your cards and your test program? And that, what advice would you share with those that might be getting ready to do what you do for a living out there with their own airplane?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's the obvious stuff. I mean, there's no shortage of documentation out there. Obviously, the new EAA manual is fantastic, all that great stuff. But as far as something you can take away today, I have to quote Doug Shane. He had a quote. He said, when your best friend comes up to you and says he just finished his airplane and he's ready to go do his first flight, what's the best thing you can do? And he said, the best thing you can do is take his keys. And what the take your keys does is it gives you, call it a month, but there's that push, right? I mean, your wife's nagging you and you're late on the hangar rent. And finally, you can afford the avionics package. Go, go, go. The DAR is going to be here. Are you going to be ready? Does he want the airplane open? Does he want it closed? Did we taxi it? Didn't we taxi it? Did we do the weight and balance enough? Big, big, big push, right? You want to make sure that you're ready for that next jump, right? What I love about EAA, the experience, right, is you say, I've never built an airplane before, and Vans sends you a kit, and you mash your first rivet, and if you didn't do it right, you read the book again, and you drill it out, and put in another one, right? Oh, I don't know how to terminate a wire, right? So you terminate a wire. Oh, that one doesn't look good. You look at the book, you figure it out. There's so many little tiny skills. How do you run a schedule? How do you run a budget? How do you register the airplane? What is a DAR? What's a notary public to get you to sign off the paperwork? All those little things you have to work through. This is no different than any of those other ones. The first flight is no different than any other ones. The difference is the risk. There's a spike in risk. There's an avalanche moment, a cliff moment in terms of exposure, both to you, to the project, to your family, to the airport. And so it's important to prepare yourself for it. All those things are doable. That most likely there's an airplane on the planet like your airplane. You can go fly. You'll hang out with that guy. You can fly something that's a little bit quicker, a little bit slower, right? Sit down with somebody who knows more than you do. Take your time. No rush, right? You can prepare for it, right? But give yourself that time, because there's, like I said, there's that building and building and building, and the pace keeps picking up, and I'm going to do the flight because I want to make it Oshkosh. You're not going to make it Oshkosh. I'm sorry. It's canceled anyway. You're not going to make it. Take your time.
Yeah, we've given them an extra year now, right? They can get that. They're not missing an Oshkosh, right? They're
no
not missing
Oshkosh
it this week. They have another year to go for that, right? So
exactly. But yeah, just like any other EAA thing, you can prepare yourself. You can get there. No matter. I mean, even we're talking about F4 Phantom, you can get there. Whether or not it's worth the effort, whether or not your wife's going to put up with all the baloney associated with it, I don't know. But you can get there. Just give yourself the chance. So that would be my recommendation.
So for maybe the young people watching today that are looking at this saying, wow, this is exactly what I want to do. I've always dreamed of being, like we talked about earlier, spaceflight. It's a big deal right now. What SpaceX just achieved for the first time to launch a commercially manned spacecraft into space after you guys did it at scale. Huge deal. Huge. A little different way of doing it, but they did it.
But awesome. Totally
big
awesome.
Deal. Huge deal. And that inspired a lot of kids, including Young Eagles and other kids at EA. What advice would you have to them on how to really make it to where you are, or anybody else that's had a very successful go with this?
I think the first thing is that it's all attainable, but man, everybody says that. I think that it's attainable in the sense that everybody that you're looking out there at that is blowing you away has needs. And there's some on that list of needs that they have, there's something that you could do. Right. And with the power of the internet and, Instagram direct message and LinkedIn direct message, or, picking up the phone call, showing up, just fly yourself out there, sit on the doorstep until they talk to you. These people have problems that you can solve, and you can lower your rate until they can't say no. Right. The opportunities are amazing. Right. The vertical takeoff stuff that's happening in the Bay Area, the stuff in Denver with Boom, obviously SpaceX. It's a crazy big world out there. And I think beyond the fact that you can do it, don't get too caught up on finding the perfect target. Just recognize that you are within 30 degrees of the right heading, and what you need to be doing right now is run it, right? So, maybe you can't get SpaceX, but, the place down the street is available, and that'll put you in LA, 3 doors down from Musk's shop. Hey, that's better. Let's do that, right? And keep pushing, because the timer's still running, even though everybody's got coronavirus. The timer's still running, and you got to get it done sometime. So,
exactly.
Is that any good? Did that make any sense?
That was great. That was awesome. So what's next for Elliot? What's next for Wasabi? What's going on? What is the next thing on your horizon that we might not know about, if you want to talk about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the same thing that we started out this whole meeting with talking about is how do you make these skills, these EAA skills, the skills that Dave Groh and Burl Fife taught me back in Mason, Michigan. How do you make those profitable in a way that allows me to provide for my family and have a roof over my head and something to eat for dinner? And that's always the question. On the other side of that, I chose to go down flight test, right? So I got to compete with these guys that have millions of dollars of training that I don't have. The thing that I know that I have that they don't have is the EAA thing, right? We've done this. We've all been in the hangar in the middle of the night trying to figure out how to rivet, right? And we got to fly tomorrow, whatever the deal is, right? And that, I believe, separates us. And I think that's where this mission, or the EAA mission, lines up very well with mine. Is that I feel like this is unusual skill set, and I feel like just like the EAAers, I think it's valuable. I think it's something that the world needs. I think in this time of this next generation of flight tests that's happening, as we generate these next generation of vehicles, we EAAers can add value in a way that the military trained guys can't, and the big school guys can't, and the guys that just worked at the big companies can't. And so it's up to us, both for ourselves and for each other, to tell that story, right? So I'm trying to do a better job of telling the story of what the services that Wasabi provides are, in a way that's palatable and can be understood, both so that guys that are coming up can save their bacon and apply it to what they're doing, and also to show it to potential customers so that we can get that work going forward. This is a hard test. Flying is a hard business. There's no rating for flight test in the US, so there's no moat around the business. Anytime I go out for a gig, I'm competing with every other commercial pilot or private pilot on the airport. As a result, I'm pedaling hard. Me and my business partner, Justin, we're pedaling hard constantly to try to keep ourselves ahead of it, to try to stay as valuable as we can and provide as much service as possible to the next program. And it's a nonstop fight. So we have a lot of cool projects going around right now. There's some stuff I was hoping to be able to tell you guys about in the last week or so, but unfortunately it hasn't kicked off yet. But lots of cool stuff coming. Stay tuned. But it's all awesome. It's a big world out there. There's a lot of good stuff coming for all of us.
So we only have a couple minutes left, Elliot. Let's end on a seemingly easy question, but it's hard for all of us. What's your favorite airplane?
My favorite airplane?
Heck yeah.
All right. So the HE-162. Why the HE-162? Because, right, so here we are, right? It's, late World War II. We're British. We got a Spitfire sitting behind us. It's early in the morning. Over the horizon comes this terrifying scream of an aircraft, right? And we're going to jump in our Spitfire, and we're going to put the might of the British Air Force up against this threat on the horizon, right? The threat coming over the horizon, this HE-162, it's built out of cardboard, right? It's built out of I believe the definition was non-strategic materials. Germany was in a tough spot. They didn't have labor. They didn't have anything. So they built this thing out of plywood and stuff that was laying around. They strapped this relatively low-tech turbine on the top, right? And the whole thing was, how fast can we make these? How fast can we put up something, right? The simplest solution to solve the problem. Boy, if that doesn't sound like an EAA to me, right? That's a long easy with a jet motor on the top of it. And that gets me really excited, right? You think of the effort that went into developing not only the Spitfire in this case, but also the Merlin up front. Like, this is an engineering monster, right? And then over the horizon comes this little, let's say, composite. Let's say it's a honey and bed sheets fiberglass long easy with a jet motor on the top of it. That gets me really excited, independent of all the politics involved. So that's my favorite.
That is awesome. Elliot, this has been a tremendous segment. Thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to chatting soon. And again, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kyle. I really appreciated being here.
Hey, no problem. For more content like this, stay tuned to eaatogether.org. Thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate it.
Whether you're a current pilot, aviation enthusiast, or just looking to get started, EAA has more than 900 local chapters worldwide that will get you involved in grassroots recreational aviation in your own backyard. EAA chapters offer a variety of programs and resources for all interest levels. Find a chapter near you at eaa.org/findachapter. Spirit of Aviation Week streaming is brought to you through the generous support of Dynon Avionics. Learn why more than 20,000 pilots already fly behind Dynon at dynon.aero.
In a world of ancient avionics, one Seattle company is breaking all the rules. Now in airplanes everywhere, coming soon to your panel. There's a reason, pilots. Fly Dynon.
Rated A for your airplane.
A warm welcome on behalf of Sporty's Pilot Shop. My name is Eric Radke, your presenter for today from Sporty's in our headquarters at the Claremont County Airport. And we're so happy you could join us during EAA Spirit of Aviation Week for today's presentation, Stop Dreaming, Start Flying, Your Roadmap to Success. For anyone out here, and I can't think of a better time than Spirit of Aviation Week, who have thought about this concept and dreamed of this concept of becoming a pilot, learning to fly, but have never quite been moved to act. And what better time than now? Great time of year, great time to be thinking about all the magic of aviation, the great community of aviation, all the things you can do, see, and accomplish when it comes to aviation. Again, I mentioned my name's Eric Radke. I have the fortunate experience to be able to come to an airport each and every day as President and Chief Instructor of Sporty's Academy. That's the flight training division of Sporty's, again, located just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio at the Claremont County Airport. That's our lovely campus. And as part of my day-to-day responsibilities, I get to talk to people just like you that are starting training, that are in various phases of training, or again, people who are just dreaming of getting started. So I'm here to share some of that expertise of Sporty's 60 years in the pilot training business. Some of those insights and some of that